welcome again to our space. Sorry about the mix-up with the address. I want to thank our co-sponsors for tonight's event, the Center for the Study of Gender and Sexuality and the Diversity and Inclusion Office of the Biological Sciences Division. I also want to thank Seminary Co-op Bookstore for showing up to sell books, so I hope you all will patronize them before you leave tonight. And just thank you so much for being a part of this very timely discussion about Black women and reproductive justice. We couldn't have, I mean, I guess maybe we could have anticipated what was going to happen with Roe v. Wade, but we think it's a conversation that needs to happen beyond abortion rights, but reproductive justice. And so here we are with our friends Natalie and Dolen and Candace, and I'm going to turn it over to my friend and colleague Dr. Tobias Spears, who's the Assistant Dean and Director of D&I in the Biological Sciences.
So I have the pleasure of introducing today's panelists and moderators, so I will do that. So Natalie Moore is an award-winning journalist based in Chicago. She works at WBEZ. She is the author of The South Side, A Portrait of Chicago and American Segregation, and co-author of The Almighty Black Peace Stone Nation, The Rise, Fall, and Resurgence of an American Gang, and Deconstructing Tyrone, a new look at Black masculinity in the hip-hop generation. She is a 2021 USA Fellow. The Pulitzer Center named her a 2020 Richard C. Longworth Media Fellow for International Reporting. In 2021, University of Chicago Center for Effective Government, based at the University of Chicago Harris School of Public Policy, welcomed her in its first cohort of senior practitioner fellows. So could we please welcome? Yes. Next, Dolen Perkins-Valdez is the author of the New York Times bestselling novel, Wench. In 2011, she was a finalist for 2 NAACP Image Awards and the Hurston Wright Legacy Award for Fiction. In 2017, HarperCollins released Wench as one of 8 Olive titles, limited edition modern classics that included books by Edward P. Jones, Louis Erdrich, and Zora Neale Hurston. Dolen received a DC commission on the arts grant for her second novel, Balm, which was published by HarperCollins in 2015. In 2013, Dolen wrote the introduction to a special edition of Solomon Northup's 12 Years a Slave, published by Simon & Schuster, which became a New York Times bestseller. She followed that with an introduction to Elizabeth Keckley's Behind the Scenes, published in 2016. Dolen is a 2020 nominee for a United States Artist Fellowship. Her newest novel, Take My Hand, was published April 2022 by Berkeley Penguin Random House. Dolen is the current chair of the board of the Penn Faulkner Foundation. On behalf of the foundation, she has visited nearly every public high school in the District of Columbia to talk about the importance of reading and writing. She is currently associate professor in the literature department at American University and lives in Washington, D.C. with her family. So welcome, Dolen. And last but certainly not least is my friend and colleague and gym partner and co-conspirator and boo, Dr. Candace Northcott, who is an assistant professor of psychiatry and behavioral neuroscience in the Biological Sciences Division. And she serves as director for the Department of Obstetrics and Gynecology Mental Health Initiative. So I just want to welcome you. I won't even read the bio, I'll just say, welcome to my dear friend, Candace.
Thank you everyone for being here. I am absolutely honored that I get to speak to both of you and that I just was invited to read quickly your, I mean, nothing lights a fire under getting through a book, right? And like you're gonna have to ask questions about it. So it was just intentional and really amazing. So thank you for being here and allowing me to share this space with you.
Thank you.
So I recently learned that you two have a pre-existing friendship, and if it's okay, I'd love to just hear how the two of you know each other, and also how you two came to both write about this simultaneously. I mean, was it planned?
No. We know each other through a mutual friend, another amazing journalist. Isn't that right how we met? Natalie?
I don't know if that's how we met, because I was thinking, I think I have a version.
Clearly we
may have another version. Well, first, thank you for being here.
Yes.
I just want to shout out Tracy. This is my 4th book, and Tracy has supported every book with an event. So I'm so grateful for your work and your support and your friendship. I think that I reached out to you out the blue when I was on the board of the Neighborhood Writing Alliance with Jackie Lazoo, who's here. And we needed a speaker for our benefit. We always do an author conversation. And we wanted, and I had just read Winch. And this might have been around 2013. And
then we discovered we had the other Natalie in common.
And then you said yes and did it for free. And we flew you here. And it was wonderful, and I think a really turning point for even our fundraisers, like getting national authors to come in, and the now defunct Neighborhood Writing Alliance. And then I used to live in Hyde Park, a few blocks away from here, just until a couple of months ago, and we had a really big, huge apartment. And I told my husband, like, I just want us to have like author parties and do salons. And so when Dolen came here for BOM, we held a party. We did an event together at Seminary at 57th Street Books, and then we held a little party for her. And then when the South Side came out, she had a party for me at her beautiful
in a gorgeous apartment with like original art.
Same like her house in DC, by the way.
But I will say that we did not plan this. How did we discover we had both written about this?
So Dolen.
You have a better memory than I do.
Sent me, and then all day long, I was like, how do we know each other? How do we know each other? I was like, Neighborhood Writing Alliance. You reached out and said, hey, I have a new book. And I thought it was just your friend saying, here's a galley. And then she said, oh, I think there's some synergy. And I was like, yeah, because we're Black female writers, same generation. And I didn't get to it right away. This was in the fall. And then, it was on my to-do list, and I started reading it, and I texted, I was like, what? I was like, you weren't kidding about the synergy. So it's so uncanny that, the books are out weeks apart from each other.
Yeah.
We did an event together in DC when I was there last month, and then Dolen was like, I'm gonna hit up Tracy and see if we can do an event together. And I was like, sure, come on in, we're just kidding. We know that there was a mix-up. So yeah, that's not planned. And it's, I know we'll talk about the different spectrums of what reproductive justice looks like.
Yeah, speaking of synergy, this moment in time that this is coming out, like, and the friendship and the fact that so much of reproductive justice is community, and that your friendship kind of emerged out of the shared community. And so, what has it been like to both have this book come out in this moment? What have these conversations been like in other spaces for both of you? I'm sure there's a spectrum.
Well, people keep mentioning, this is perfect timing, thinking that's some kind of marketing moment. And I have been working on this book for 7 years, and I tell people, I started this book 3 Supreme Court justices ago, okay? Never in a million years was this ever a marketing moment in any way, shape, or form for me. And for me, I am still wrapping, I'm a historical fiction writer, so I'm still wrapping my head around what's happening right now. And I don't have an op-ed in my drawer ready to go, I'm processing. I have something to say, don't get me wrong. But I also, I'm not really seeing my book as being sort of part of this conversation as much as I hope it will be, and I hope it will remind us of a few things as because I don't even think the conversation that we're going to have has really even started. We're about to enter a very, very painful conversation in this country. Very painful for everyone. And my hope is that the book will remind us of a few things as we go into that conversation.
I started working on this book in 2018 and knew that there were restrictions happening in states, but naively thought that Roe was protected. At some point, I realized that I've been telling people, I was like, not if, I was like, when this play is out, because it'll be staged in June and July, I was like, Roe will be overturned during the production. I think we're all shocked by last week because that's never happened. And I finished this morning. It's taken me a while. I read all of Alito's, the entire. There's a lot to say about that too, but I read all of that, and I think the conversation. People don't really buy plays, so this reception has been a little different for me. And like our mutual friend Natalie was like, "You're so brave," and I was like, "I don't think I'm brave," but now I'm realizing that people really don't want to talk about abortion. And I think I underestimated that. And it's a very intraracial conversation that's happening in the play, and that's what attracted me to the story. I think there is a moment, like I didn't market this, but I do, it's crummy to say, but I do think that I am now getting a little bit more attention just in the past week. And I'm gonna take advantage of that because, not because I'm gonna get rich, because book sales don't generate that, but I think any author really just wants your work talked about and the ideas talked about, not so. And I want people to come to the play and experience it that way. So this week it hasn't even been a week. So my head is still spinning about, finishing reading the opinion, seeing the conversation that I think is starting to bubble. And I think now people are a little bit more ready to have the conversation, and it is going to be painful.
Can I stay with the Billboard for a moment? Because a play is a distinct medium to write in. And so I'm wondering, how did you decide to do that, to use a play for this topic and for this work?
I don't think I have it in me to write the great American novel. I've never had that as a desire because I don't think I would be good at it. And I just thought, as I tried different writing, a play seemed accessible. And turns out there's a lot of similarities in writing audio scripts as it is to writing plays. So even in the NPR training book, it'll say, think of your script as a 3-act play. Of course, one's fiction, one's nonfiction. Or think about the playwright and write for the ear. And so you're writing for the ear. You're not writing for the eye. So that made me feel confident. I did take a class, and I was like, oh, I can do this. And even though a play can be long, it's still a truncated amount of time. The way, if you're listening to a 4, 6, or even 8-minute story that I have on the air, you're packing it all in, and it's always like, what are the stakes here? Like that's what we talk about, for our longer pieces, and that was the same mentality in writing a play. And just a little, like if anybody in here loves plays, they all have something in common. They're urgent. You're not just ruminating, like something or someone shows up, a relative, an object. But if you just, think back to plays that you love, something shows up in that moment. You're not just doing a play because this is a cool topic, the way you might for a novel. You still have to have literary devices in it, but the urgency is very similar. And so that's how that came about.
Yeah, there's the urgency to the format, and then certainly to the topic.
Yeah.
Certainly to the topic. Well, I was wondering, part of our format today is going to be, I said I have 2 pages worth of questions that I could ask, but I also get to have dinner. But I'm going to try to get through. But so we'll have kind of a conversation here, and I really want Dolen to get a chance to read an excerpt of her novel to everyone. And then we'll kind of go out to the audience, so don't feel like I'm going to take all the time. So we certainly will have an opportunity for that. But I was wondering if now we could take a moment and hear a part of Take My Hand.
Oh, you want to read? Okay.
Okay.
So should I set the book up? Did we set
Yeah,
it
yeah.
up? Okay. So the book is set in 1973 in Montgomery, Alabama. And it is inspired by the true story of these 2 sisters who were sterilized without their family's consent by a federally funded family planning clinic. I take the main character as the nurse who worked at the clinic, one of the nurses who worked at the clinic, who is changed by her encounter with this family and who does everything she can to try to protect the girls, but isn't able to. The forces are just too strong. So I'm going to read just a couple of pages from the first day she meets the girls. And that's all I'll say about that. Just a couple of pages. Okay. When I drove up, at first I assumed that the Williams sisters lived in the neat brick Rambler with the 2 pickup trucks parked out front. A thick cloud of dust swirled around my mama's little car, and when it cleared, I spied 2 little white boys standing on the house porch. I rolled my window all the way down, hoping they'd see my uniform. "I'm looking for the Williams family?" I was positive I read the number on the mailbox correctly. One of them pointed behind the house and I understood. I wound the car around the pickups, following the scant outline of tire tracks. The Pinto pushed through the ruts, bouncing so hard I was afraid I'd hit my head on the roof. I prayed I wouldn't get stuck. The last thing I wanted was to have to walk back down to that house and ask those boys to go get their daddy. Fortunately, it hadn't rained in a while and the ground was dry. The trees cleared and the land swelled up into a hill. At the top sat a cabin. The car sputtered, but I tapped the gas pedal and somehow made it to the top. Everything leveled out and the tire tracks disappeared into brush. Off to my left, I could see a wide field of green stalks. I didn't know a thing about farming, but anybody with eyes could tell that was wheat growing out there. Cows grazed in a lot beside the barn. A lone chicken peeked at me as it stepped through knee-high grass. Up close, the structure was more of a wooden shanty than a cabin, and it looked tired, as though a wind had blown it askew and it hadn't had the energy to right itself. A skinny black dog scratched his back in the dirt. I got out of the car and stepped into a huddle of gnats. The air smelled of burning wood. Something told me these girls couldn't be in school. If they were, they didn't go every day. They should have been expecting me, but they didn't have a phone, and I wasn't confident they even knew about our appointment. They had initially been assigned another nurse who had quit the clinic the month before. I was there to pick up where she left off. A girl wearing grubby pants and an orange t-shirt shaded her eyes with a hand. The backlight of the sun darkened her face. "How you doing? I'm Sybil Townsend from the Family Planning Clinic." It didn't make sense for us to be out here in our uniforms, but Miss Seeger insisted. It was March chilly and I had left my sweater in the car. The wind reached my neck. I stepped up closer. Someone had tried to braid the girl's hair, but the roots were so matted with dirt that only the ends of the hair could be plaited. I clutched the file under my arm and tried to remember what I'd read. "Are you India?" The dog rubbed against my leg and I fought an urge to push the animal off. It sidled away. I looked down and sure enough it had left a brown mark on my white pantyhose. "She don't talk." I jumped. I hadn't seen the other girl standing inside the screen door. I remembered the contents of the file. The younger sister was mute. I had skimmed that detail, but it came back to me now. "Oh, okay. I'm Sybil Townsend. I'm the nurse sent to give y'all shots today." "What happened to the other one?" "I don't know," I stuttered. The nurse's leave taken baffled me too. Maybe the demands of the job had been too much. Maybe she'd found something that paid more. Being out here on this farm wasn't anybody's idea of a good time. Even so, there weren't government jobs just laying around waiting to be picked up. "Is your daddy home?" "No, ma'am." I blinked as I pieced together their story in my head. Mace Williams, father, 33, milked cows, tilled the land, did whatever the white man told him to do in exchange for this shanty and a pittance of money. Constance Williams, mother, deceased. Patricia Williams, grandmother, 62. In the distance, the inky outline of grazing cows flickered in the light. "Your grandmama here?" "Grandma, the nurse here." I tried to smile, but I wasn't sure if my expression passed for polite. I didn't know whether I should ask to come inside or if I should wait for the grandmother to come out. The older sister settled it. I remembered now that her name was Erica. "You can come in if you want." She opened the door for me. The screen pulled away from the edge of the wooden frame, not much protection against the flies. It creaked on its hinges. I'm not sure if I said this before, but walking into that house changed my life, and yes, it changed theirs too. I walked right up in there with my file and bag of medicine ready to save somebody. Little old me, 5 foot 5 inches of know-it-all.
Are you reading the audiobook? 'Cause you
I'm
should.
not. She is really good. My audiobook narrator is really good.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, both of these pieces, the characters you did not have to do any work with your imagination to create these characters. I mean, they were so rich. And you know, just kind of starting with Sybil, she seemed to embody this tension between autonomy and help, right? But help in this, like, you know, patriarchal or you know, this institutional assistance way that kind of takes autonomy. But it was all good intention, right? The intention was, the intentions were good, right? That's kind of what we're kind of offered as something to wrestle with. And I'm wondering, you know, what did you want us to kind of, you know, what did you want us to see her struggling with, and what did you want us to lay out? What did you want to lay out for us when we thought about, like, what she was struggling with through this book, or one of the many things, you know?
Yeah. Well, you know, when birth control became more widely accessible for women, it was considered, on the one hand, to be liberating, right? But on the other hand, when it came to poor communities, there was the potential for abuse. And in that scene, she's there to give them Depo-Provera shots, which in 1973 is still a very experimental drug. There have been very recent clinical studies at that time that say that it is harmful. And so she's riding that line of wanting women to have more control over their bodies, but also being part of a system that wants to control women's bodies. And I think that that's a very delicate line for anybody to walk, let alone a 23-year-old young woman straight out of college. And so when it begins, she's not wrestling with anything at all. She just wants to, you know, help women have reproductive health care. The clinic provides, you know, reproductive health services. She wants women to have control over their life. She wants women to not have an unplanned pregnancy the way she had. And so, but she very quickly learns that this powerful government apparatus of which she is a part has other intentions. And you know, and the very first thing she learns about is, you know, and this is all, I always say this is the first 3 chapters. The very first lesson she learns when she meets them that day is that the younger sister, who she's just given this Depo shot to, has not even started her cycle. And the clinic has not written that in the note. And what she believes is that they've never even asked her if she started her cycle. Because she's mute, right? You know, they're just making these assumptions about her. So, yeah, it's not so much at the beginning that I want her to be wrestling with anything. I want her to be doing what so many of us try to do when we're trying to give people access to something. But, you know, sometimes the other side of that is the potential for abuse.
I really felt her youth and her energy, and just how, you know, almost just like, I'm going to be here to help, and I'm just going to change people's lives, and, you know, but I think from the 43-year-old in me was like, oh no. And so, you know, speaking about the plays format and just this idea of, like, something's going to happen, that even in her youth, you know, I was thinking, oh, something's going to happen here. And I really didn't know what for a while. It was very, you know, I kind of felt, I felt a tension, like an anxiety. And I'm struck, and as you were reading, I was struck by how the whole thing was her telling a story to her daughter, and it held the attention of just a great story in a story. It just was beautiful. Thank you for reading that.
Thank you. I mean, I feel like, you know, one of the things that we all have to wrestle with as we go forward in this conversation is making sure that, you know, because I think all of us have the potential to overstep when we're trying to do community work. And one of the things I want to just make sure, and I say, like, if this book enters a conversation, I want us to remind us of a few things. And one of the things I want it to remind us to do is to listen. And to not ever put ourselves, I mean, have you ever been, and I know we got some D&I people in here, you ever been in a D&I meeting and people put themselves at the center of the conversation, and they shouldn't be at the center because they're not at the center. And in this book, I'm hoping that it reminds us that we are not, we, and when I say we, I mean the people in this room, the people with resources, okay, are not necessarily at the center of this thing that's about to happen. And we just need to remember that there's a time for us to be like front and center, and there's another time for us to listen. And that's something that she has to learn.
Yeah.
I love the book, but I just want to say, I wasn't sure when Sybil was overstepping. Like, was it wrong for her to take them to her house to give them a bath and comb their hair? Was it wrong for her to try to find them better housing? Because if she just ignored and did the shots, it's like, how do you ignore their conditions, which of course are systemic, but here is an individual family. So I wasn't sure when is she crossing the line? I don't know. I mean, I think
because she would have done the same thing.
Maybe. I mean, I would hope that she would have tried to intervene in some way. I don't know what the correct maybe the question is, what is the correct intervention? But those moments, I mean, she did bring the family joy, and she recognized her own, like, this wasn't someone who was just clueless throughout. Like, the grandmother checked her. She did take a step back, but I mean, some of those things were just so minor, like the combing of the hair and the lotion.
Well, I remember this story.
Yeah.
I remember the story that my husband told me that he witnessed one time. This man was standing outside of a McDonald's with a cup and asking for money, and someone went inside and bought him a sandwich and came out and gave it to him, and he went inside and asked for the money back for the sandwich. And I remember my husband telling me about that, and I said, so what was your take on that? And he said, people want to say in how their good deeds are done for them. Right? And I thought that was a really interesting way of looking at it, right? People want to say in the good deeds that are done. And he didn't ask for a sandwich. He asked for money. So I think that I get what you're saying, Natalie, and I think I probably would have and would still, if I had any resources, help that family. But at the same time, I think what she has to do is just like make sure that they are getting what they want and need, and that they have a say in those good deeds.
I think she came off as naive and not as a savior.
Oh,
and maybe
yeah.
it's because she was black and from Birmingham, but it never felt, at least to me, it didn't, having it as a interracial, even though and having it in the class context was, sometimes that's more interesting when you see class within the same, no matter what the race is, versus race solely.
And I tried to address that savior point head on. I'm like, when she's talking to her daughter, I'm like, I know you're going to say that this was a savior thing, and I just want to tell you that all of us had baggage. We came in with baggage and we left with baggage. And because I knew that was a conversation that I was entering, the savior complex conversation.
Now I'm wondering, yeah, for sure. I'm wondering if you can kind of share, like summarize the arc of the play, and we can kind of think about this same topic, but how the play kind of captured some same themes.
What happens in the play is there's a black man running for city council in Inglewood who puts up a billboard that says, the most dangerous place for a black child is his mother's womb. Keep Inglewood black, vote Demetrius Drew. And there is a Black Women's Health Center that's in Inglewood that puts up its own billboard that says black women have the right to make decisions for their bodies. Abortion is self-care, # trust black women. Well, their billboard becomes more controversial because no one has seen abortion framed as health care. So because of Chicago, I put it in the city council race and didn't just make this as a pro-life guy, because I don't even know, and I know this character, I don't even know if he believes what he says. And so in a lot of ways there's like a pro-choice battle, not just are you for abortion or against. It's more nuanced than that. There's the incumbent city council member, a woman, and then finally there is Kayla, the 19-year-old program assistant who runs the social media campaigns for the clinic and for everything that is going on.
Well, I definitely want to get into the characters but before that, you know, I felt like one of the, like a central theme was something that I think Black women feel, right? Which is, you know, a result of misogynoir, like how do you respond to attack? Because you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. And so, you know, we really were kind of left at this arc of like what would have happened if there was nothing, or if there, you know, if there was no second Billboard, or if the Billboard was different, and you know, why couldn't we talk about, you know, abortion as self-care and as healthcare? And so I'm wondering, you know, did you like, how did that response piece? How did you want to? What did you want to communicate about that decision point that, you know, women, especially Black women, have to kind of face sometimes?
Well, I will admit, so the anti-abortion billboards have been all over the country, including Chicago. And then this happened in Dallas. A Dallas group put up the self-care billboard in 2018. And I feel so ashamed to say this, but when I saw that, I was like, self-care, what is that? Like had the same reaction. That's candles, that's spa. I had never seen it framed that way. And so I wanted to challenge myself. And I talked to a friend who's a midwife at Choices in Memphis, which does everything there, including abortion. And she talked me through it, because this was a homework assignment too, that the play started as. And I was like, I'm writing about this billboard, help me understand. And then that led me to reading, more work, and like I said, I'm like, that's not a big deal. But it was, I don't want to diminish that, because there was controversy, even within Black women's circles, about will this message undermine our work, even if we agreed with it. And so, you know, a great compliment I got was when we were in DC from Fatima Goss-Graves, who's head of the National Women's Law Center. She was like, this play was like you were sitting in on conversations that are happening. So I feel like I nailed the accuracy with that. And so I just wanted to challenge people, even those who are pro-choice. What does this mean? Because how abortion has been framed and cloaked in secrecy, and keep abortion safe, legal, and rare is what I grew up with. And so there was that, and then I wanted a vehicle to push back on patriarchy in Black communities. What does the pro-Black nationalist look like? But
Nailed it. I mean,
he's
you jumped off the page.
and so I wanted to, you know, without being preachy, use that as a way to get to those issues. And people saying, well, this is a, you know, Black women that have been co-opted by white feminism. This is a white issue. And even, I mean, that I've heard some older Black women who have said, well, who are pro-choice, well, abortion is a white woman's issue. And so how we've been trained to think that when that's not true. So to me, there's for various reasons, but, and I think we're gonna see some of that bubble up even more. Or even some people say that this is just a women's issue, and trying to, you know, if I can just go back to Alito's opinion, one of the things that there's so much that hasn't come out yet, I don't think, in the mainstream about it. And one thing he said was, there's no stigma to being a single mother anymore. You can't get fired for being pregnant. There are all these support systems to help you if you want to have a baby. We have no universal health care. All these things. We run out of baby formula today. That was on the front page of the Tribune. But the thought that women have support, so there's no need for abortion. That was shocking.
Yeah, I'm a little breathless.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Especially if you're considered pro-life. Like, it's really pro-birth. It's not pro-life, because all these other mechanisms are not in place in society.
That's always been a misnomer, that pro-life.
Yeah. Yeah.
So well, we're kind of talking a little bit about it, and it's emerged in both of, you know, in both of these conversations, in this conversation that we're having, this race and class tension, and it, you know, it came up between Sybil and the Williams family, and I think it comes up between the, you know, in the election, and, you know, the, again, whether he believes what he's saying or not, what he's trying to do is galvanize this, you know, this body in Chicago, this group in Chicago. And I'm wondering, you know, how did you want to, both of you, how did you want to express or talk about this reality that Black communities have to manage, which is that we're treated as a monolith, sometimes unite against, you know, injustice together, but oftentimes can have very different experiences. Like, how did you want to talk about that and let the reader in on those challenges?
I think it's time. For a long time we didn't talk about these things. And the Black middle class was often portrayed in that sort of Cosby 1980s ideal, which was an understandable pushback against this notion of Black degeneracy, right? But which served its purpose at the time and which needs to be sort of, you know, moved past. And so I think it's really important for us to acknowledge the multifacetedness of Black communities. And our communities have also become more culturally diverse within Black communities. So I think it's really important, and, you know, to sort of keep it on the topic that we're talking about with our books and with what we're talking about today. I think it's going to be really important. This chair does weird things. I was like, what am I doing here? I'm talking and the chair is going this way. Sorry, this is all getting on video, and now I feel like I'm falling out. Okay, don't air that part. Edit that out.
I think what you did really, well, I've been saying this recently. I feel like, at least in television and movies, that the Black middle class is not depicted well. It's so caricatured. Like, they all look down on this group and not understanding that there's class diversity within Black families. And so my mom is here. Like, this, we always talk about outstanding Negro families. So her character, like the grandfather went to Tuskegee. Her father was a doctor. They're all doctors. So when I meet people whose grandparents went to college, I'm like, outstanding Negro family. But they weren't removed. It wasn't like they didn't want to be a part of their community. I mean, yes, they had some elitist ways, perhaps. No different than I think anybody in that class range, but they were still serving. And so I thought that you address class without making them, again, how we see, I think, too often on television and movies, like Jumping the Broom, like, oh, they just look down on everybody. It's like, no, you ever have a cousin who was in prison, or an aunt who did not go to college? It's much more elastic. So I thought that
I thought it was
hit that
really
well.
important not to have Sybil's family be the sort of model of perfection, vis-a-vis the Williams family being this model of imperfection, right? So her father, yes, he's a physician, but he's also a workaholic, and he's not very emotionally present in his home. And her mother is an artist, which is already a sort of, you know, thing to be able to do, and also suffers from mental illness. So I really wanted to not build that perfect, outstanding Negro family at all, to show that they also had their problems. But I do feel that it's really important because I was just down in Montgomery, Alabama, and I was at dinner with a Black woman who is a professor who is pro-choice, and we were talking about, you know, community strategies, and she said, well, yeah, but my partner is anti-abortion. And I was like, wait, what? You know, how are y'all gonna, you know, like, y'all about to have some interesting conversations in your house, you know. But that's Alabama, right? And so I think that, and you know, we're talking about the Black community. So within the Black community, we're gonna have different opinions about this. And some of those people who hold these opinions are the very people in need of these services. You know, and so I think it's just going to be, because you know when we talk about like the concerns of Black women in this debate, when we talk about Black women having a voice, we still have to recognize that even within that group, there are going to be differences. But that doesn't mean that we should silence ourselves, or that we should in any way be discouraged by that. We still have to speak out for this. And I know you were telling me, Natalie, when you were at the clinic in Memphis, they were telling you that the anti-abortionists come there to get abortions.
Mm-hmm. I think every abortion provider will tell you that there are, and they're belligerent when they tell them themselves. Like, they don't even have to say what their position is, but they tell on themselves because they are like, well, what you're doing is wrong, but I'm different. Like, that's
Yeah, I see people work with the Ryan Center. We have our Ryan Center, and which provides abortion services here in Chicago. And I think the most painful experiences I have is when I'm working with somebody and they say, I don't believe in this, but I have to do this because otherwise, da 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 da.
So why do you think they volunteer that information to you?
It's some sort of absolution, I wonder. Sometimes it feels like they're kind of a confession. And it's quite sad.
How do you respond?
Well, and so, or some people will say, I'm killing my baby. I don't want to kill my baby, right? And I'll say, we work with women all the time, and we don't believe that that's what's happening here. And I'll share with them, your ability to access this is because we all get to access this. And so, we believe it's available for everybody, and I wish you could release yourself and everyone else from that those rules, and just kind of offer that. But it's my time with them is their time, and I don't necessarily want to disagree, but I do challenge sometimes, especially when the values are so. Like, there's some, even as a psychologist, I think there are some times when you have to kind of say what your values are, right? Like, this is a space where we don't talk about racism, where we don't show up as racist. So we'll talk about it if you bring that up, So, so I do challenge it. And I share that it's quite painful to hear you say that. But yeah, it does feel like a confession when they do it.
Wow.
Sorry, I kind of jumped right into that.
Powerful.
Can we talk characters? And then I know everybody's kind of have lots of questions for you. I'm being selfish. Kayla, like, just bounced in and out of scenes, and she bounced off the pages, and she's the 19-year-old. And is she somebody that, like, did you have somebody in mind when you were writing her, and what did you want her to do?
I didn't, but it's been so great. Like, she has emerged as the fan favorite. People love Kayla, and I was going to bring her up when talking about class because, she's from Inglewood. She aspires to go to college. She has not. She had her own abortion off the page, but talks about it as she's trying to, rally and tell stories. So that's been really nice that people have taken to her. When I thought about, I didn't have a person in mind, but I think I was inspired, because she's part of the brilliant Black girls in the clinic. I was inspired by a Long Walk Home girlfriends that's based here that work with teenage Black girls. And what I was really trying to get at was a class issue, because when we hear about Black girl magic and Black excellence, it's a type of Black girl. Natural hair, college bound or in college, representing the race in some way, and all that is fine, but I wanted to honor, for lack of a better term, the round the way girls. Here's a girl from Inglewood who is smart and has strategy, that may be overlooked in our collective imagination about what Black girl magic is.
Well, we couldn't avoid her. She was, and she also captured how young people are talking about this, right? Older people are making decisions, but young people are talking about it and want to share their experiences and want people to, I just feel like young people are just much more, I don't know, they just want more, and older people are like muting them. And so even the fact that she was the one with the social media that ultimately got the message, got the most kind of balanced and healthy messages out there that other people were engaging with, I thought was powerful. So that was wonderful. All right, I'm going to give up of the, and how are we doing on time?
A little after 5.
So,
It's 5 to 5, so we're just.
okay, wonderful. Are there any questions?
Hi, thank you so much. I devoured your books, and I devoured them specifically while at the National Abortion Federation annual meeting 2 weekends ago. And so I just want to thank you both. I was wondering if Kayla was inspired by, there's an interview with Tony Bond at the end of your publication. And so I was wondering if perhaps Kayla was inspired by the Chicago Abortion Fund program, where people who had experienced abortions and that were funded through CAF then were involved in a program to self-advocate and talk about their abortion experiences. So that's actually what Kayla made me think of.
Oh, no, I didn't even know about that program.
Yeah,
so I wasn't
yeah.
thinking.
Yeah. But my actual question was, as a group of us here are healthcare providers involved in abortion care, and you all are writing about this topic and this space, do you have thoughts on how we can all collaborate? I think the arts are so important for promoting these ideas and pushing boundaries. We have, personal experiences in terms of caring for patients, how perhaps we can work synergistically around these topics.
And when you say we, you mean black and white women?
Oh, I mean,
Or you just
abortion
mean
providers.
all people?
I mean abortion providers. Sorry.
And-
That could go in so many different ways. And artists and writers.
Oh,
And
okay.
perhaps, if there's any way that, this could be something that could be an area for collaboration.
Well, I can tell you the average person does not know an abortion care provider and has never had a conversation with one. And, I think in the mainstream, people who provide these services are still in shadows, right? I mean, you can probably speak more eloquently to this than I can. So I think it's going to be very important for people to even just begin to engage with healthcare providers in this space so that they even know what it looks like. I mean, you're just talking about when women come to the clinic kinds of conversations. And there's been lots of, great produced radio segments I've been listening to over the last week that have really been interviewing. But we can't just be interviewing professors, and we can't just be interviewing people that have written a book on this, that, and the rest. I think it's going to be very important for the healthcare providers to speak up and out. And I know that this is still very dangerous work. I tell people, my main character admits in the book that she's had an abortion. And that was scary for me to write, right? I woke up one morning and I realized that that's why she's doing this work, is because she's had an abortion. And I wanted her to say that, and I want that to be in the book. But I hesitate to tell people that I was scared to write that because I don't go through any of the personal risks that the actual healthcare providers do. And I respect that work. So, on the other hand, I'm saying that in the context of saying that, I understand that there are still some dangerous people out here. But I also just think it's going to be really important for people to know, people don't know that the majority of women who come to have an abortion have already had a child, right? They're not coming in there with most. I think it's something like 60%. 60%, right? Okay, they don't know that the poverty in which some of these women are living under. You heard about people who are making $15,000 a year. That kind of, and they're pregnant and they just can't afford another child. That's why we talk about reproductive justice. It's so important for us to know that this conversation is not just about terminating a pregnancy. One big part of this conversation is the kids. How are we going to? You talk about this term pro-birth. Instead of pro-life as a substitute, but if you are pro-birth, are you pro-child too? So that's a part of the discussion we need to have, and You know, the right to raise a child in a healthy, safe environment is a part of reproductive justice. The right to choose not to be a mother at all. That is part of reproductive justice. And I don't mean terminating a pregnancy, I mean just not getting pregnant, right? You know, there was a time when you were a pariah to not want to be pregnant. And in my book, Sybil does not want to be pregnant, ever. And I had ambivalences to be, my whole life about being pregnant. So I respect it. So I will say that one way that we can work together is to see each other, listen to each other, sit down and break bread, and not leave this conversation here in the halls of this great institution. You know, we gotta have this conversation in the streets.
I'm very worried about the safety of anybody who speaks up about this. I'm a psychiatrist. I wrote about it, and I didn't want my children's. I mean, when I went to give grand rounds at Tulane, they sent an armed guard. And I'm talking about psychiatry. I've never done an abortion, to take me to the lecture hall. I mean, these people are murderers. Those people aren't murderers, but they're murderers out to get them. And this situation may make that worse. I don't know what you people feel about your safety, but we know that abortion providers were murdered one after the other.
I read this book called The Family Roe, R-O-E, which was wonderful, but about Norma McCorvey, who was Jane Roe, and her kids. It talked about the doctors. It was sweeping, and he was actually a Pulitzer finalist yesterday for nonfiction. And one of the things that I walked away with, and then I read an op-ed about it, is how the medical community abandoned abortion providers. They didn't make it a mainstream healthcare issue. And I wonder where we're moving now, like the protection and not making it a fringe issue. I mean, one of these doctors was shot and then survived, and then years later was killed in church. I forgot his name, otherwise I would say it. George Tiller in Kansas. But who supported him? Who supports the provider's work? And I think that's been a missing, beyond security, but as the institution, like what is the institutional support? What is the medical community? And I think that there's some opportunities to have different conversations 50 years later than what was had before. And I think the other thing that we're going to see that I believe will be different pre-Roe is the surveillance. The laws of aiding and abetting and going after people. And I don't think that those were the kinds of conversations or worries that were happening before Roe.
I want to just jump back a little bit before, just to make it did strike me how many characters in both the play and the book were child-free. And I reflected that as I was growing up, I did not have examples in much of the reading of characters, women that did not have children, and it was not tragic.
And I didn't even think about that. I guess I that.
And that just was something that I noticed, I felt, and I appreciated. So.
All right, it's going to be a little bit long-winded to get to just some type of perspective on something that everybody has actually mentioned. Great conversation. Everybody has talked about muting, right? And it seems like to some degree both of your books kind of have managed silencing in a very interesting way. I think, and there's so much to be said, obviously. I think that there is like religious discourse and birth control versus abortion that I think I would love to hear about. But I confessed to you that when I came in that I hadn't finished the book yet. Luckily, I've covered the first 3 chapters. And I admit that, aside from the fact that I have piles of grading, it's also that I read Natalie's book, and like everybody else was a little bit shocked to find the similarities between the two books. And of course I traveled a little bit too to my first paper that I wrote in college. It was in a history class, and it was about my mother's sterilization. She was sterilized as part of Operation Bootstrap in Puerto Rico, and by the time that she was 22, and she of course was also part of experimental birth control processes, and that ultimately led to her receiving a hysterectomy at age 22. And I remember writing about this, and my teacher, gave me an A, and she was like, "This is so horrible," and she called it mutilation. And I had heard my mother tell the story about how she was never asked. She didn't really speak English either, or not enough to really negotiate with with the doctor at the time. And so everything was handled through my father, who of course just kind of, listened to them say this is in her best interest, and so he agreed to it, right? So for me, and then once I heard that, I remember going back to my mother and saying, "Mommy, did you know that this is mutilation?" First generation college me at an Ivy League, going back and telling my mother what the professor told me, right? Which is why I value so much like the idea of like the evolution of class too, and kind of the managing of that in both of your books, right? Like that. Not all of us start in the middle class. Like there is a movement toward it, and that really affects the way that we understand these things too. And I feel like throughout our whole, my life as a woman, and in negotiating these things with my mother and understanding them together also led to, I think, our perspective, both my sister and I's perspective on, our bodies and our reproductive rights. My sister doesn't have any children, right? She chose not to. And that was not an anomaly, and my mother never allowed it to be an anomaly. I remember telling my mother, I'm gonna have kids, but I'm not gonna get married, and my mother was like, well, remember that. Like there was a type of like freedom in some ways, like even though she was so profoundly silenced in that choice, like there was also like this liberty to raise her daughters with a different discourse, and in a very intelligent and I think very impactful way. So all that to ask, why was the character mute, and why did you choose a billboard that doesn't really speak to people?
The English professor, of course. Question.
So you're talking about India, the little sister? Well,
I wondered that too.
in real life, one of the younger Ralph's sister had a disability.
Okay.
A severe disability, but I don't know what the disability was exactly. When I went, back then people didn't really diagnose disabilities the way we do now. They made sort of general, and sometimes it wasn't in the record, and I couldn't actually find it in the record. And the sisters were still alive, and I never interviewed them. So I just purposefully and intentionally. So I decided that I would make her mute in my book. And one of the things I was trying to do was to emphasize that they were vulnerable, to emphasize that, I made them a little bit younger than the actual Ralph sisters were 12 and 14. My girls are 11 and 13. The actual Ralph sisters had a mother. My girl's mother is deceased. I made some changes so that I could emphasize that they were children and that they were vulnerable. And also, by choosing muteness, I, wanted to emphasize the ways in which people speak for disabled people. I have a disabled brother, and one of the things he hates that I do, and I have to catch myself to this day, is when I finish his sentences because he speaks very, very slowly. And when he calls me and I'm busy, because he calls me, he only wants to talk a few minutes, but I have to answer, and he'll say, "I need you." I said, I know, you need me to send that thing out to you too. No. And then he makes me wait for him. And so people do speak for disabled people a lot. I'm a living witness to that. So I wanted to just emphasize that the state was trying to speak for her and was trying to suggest that if she were if she were raped or something like that, they wouldn't know because she wouldn't tell anybody. And how do you know if she's sexually active if she's not talking? And so this is the reason why when we enter this conversation, we need to speak broadly about women's bodies. I think terminating a pregnancy is very, very an important thing that we need to have access to. But I also think that what scares me even more is that there are going to be other ways in which our bodies are, the right to control our bodies is invaded by, I mean, I don't know, we know what's happening in the midterms. I live in DC. I know it's going to be a very, very tough presidential campaign. That's all I can say. And, you know, we're looking at a different political landscape, possibly within the next 2 years. And with a Supreme Court that looks the way it looks. I just, you know, and I think as soon as a Republican candidate comes in, Clarence Thomas is going to retire. So there we are. I don't even know what to say.
I chose billboards because they really happen. I guess I'm kind of historical fiction too.
You should write that novel though, Natalie. I heard you say that.
Way.
Yes.
I don't have a desire to write a novel. Maybe in 5 years. And maybe 5 years
Did you
ago.
have a desire to write a play 10 years ago?
I didn't, so. So it was a little ripped from the headlines. It's not quite historic. But one thing I have learned, and even reporting on some of these issues, is how messaging is really important no matter what side that you're on. And it's the, I mean, to the arts part, what we've been seeing more recently is shout your abortion stories, like having the open mics, and that's a form of messaging. We also know that there are, you know, bloody billboards that are out there. When I was in Memphis, there were 2 billboards across the street from the clinic. They weren't targeting Black women, and they didn't have graphic images, but it was still, you know, choice. Or I've noticed, where was I driving? Just this, is it on Western or 119? Cicero, maybe. Heart, you can hear the heartbeat in these days, and it's a mother coddling a baby. And, you know, so they're trying to, yeah, I mean, you see what they're doing. And even the whole heartbeat. I mean, I know this. I've been covering these issues, and I didn't know that it really wasn't a heartbeat. But all of that is the messaging. And now there's the new swag that's out there. You know, everyone loves someone who has an abortion, or, you know, tote bags and t-shirts. So I think the messaging, I mean, we have a message right here now. This is what an abortion access the border looks like. So I think that messaging has been very important to all no matter how people land on the cause.
We have time for maybe one more question.
I think super short. Thank you for both of you for being here, and thank you for writing the book about the play about the billboards in Inglewood. I work at Planned Parenthood. I remember when those signs were there, and how really like hurt our staff who work in Inglewood were by it. And yeah, I just remember it being so hurtful. And my question though is the play, you said I want people to see the play, is it being performed?
Thank you for asking that question.
I want to, as someone who's in leadership at the Planned Parenthood of Illinois, I would love to get tickets.
You all are buying out a night.
Yeah, I'm not kidding. Like
They are.
If you want to talk about like collaboration with the arts, I want everyone who works for us, especially in our Inglewood Health Center, to be able to come see your play.
So of course I forgot. I keep forgetting these postcards wherever I go. It's being produced by 16th Street Theater, which is in Berwyn, but because of COVID and spacing issues, it's actually going to be downtown at Northwestern's new theater. So if you the dates are June 23rd to July 17th, and there are you can buy virtual tickets too, so if you want to share it with people outside of the region, or if folks aren't comfortable, you do have to be masked in the theater, and I don't think they're going to go full capacity. But 16th Street Theater, the tickets are on sale now.
Yeah, she did not pay me to say that.
She was a plant, so
Be prepared for a theater bios.
Yeah,
You know, maybe it's the psychologist in me that wants to kind of check in with you about this before we wrap up, but you know, both Sybil and Tanya struggled, like you saw kind of a slow burnout through each of the pieces. And you know, and I think especially for Black women, talking about self-care and wellness and, you know, giving of, like that just was, and now as we're talking about the fight that's before, that we're in, that's before us, how do you sustain yourself, and what hopes do you have for people that are going to be in this fight about how you sustain for the long run?
Good question. What is?
I don't even think I'm sustaining myself very well. I'm just like a lot of people out here. I'm exhausted. I'm tired. COVID has worn me out. I will say my grandmother was born in 1909. She's deceased now, but she was born in 1909. And till the day she died, she was an optimist. She believed in this country. She lived through the 20th century. She saw 2 wars. She saw Jim Crow. She saw a lot, but every picture I have of her, she was smiling. You know, and my grandfather walked out of the house in a suit and put his hat on with his head up. And I'm from Memphis, Tennessee originally, and I grew up seeing people walk out of the door with dignity and with pride and facing what was just crushing stress, crushing oppression, crushing racial injustice. And so I think what we have to just remind ourselves is that this country has seen really tough times before, and there were people who maintained their belief in the country. I mean, Black people fought in every war that this country's ever fought. Why would you do that? Okay, you know, if you didn't believe that this country had something to offer you. So maybe just plain dumb, I don't know, but maybe we need to be more like them. Maybe we need to just have a belief that we can make a better world for the future generations. Like everybody else, every now and then I think, maybe this is the kids' fight. Maybe, you know, we're talking about the young people in your play. Maybe we need to let them fight this thing, because I'm tired. I'm really tired. I don't have any self-care right now. I need some self-care. I need some candles. All that stuff. But, you know, but I just remember my grandmother. And if they could do it, y'all, if people could go out there and fight and risk their lives and put it all on the line, we can do it too. And we will live to fight another day. I believe that. I do. And I don't believe history is linear. It's cyclical. We're going through a dark moment, but we will rise again. But, you know, we can't sit still. Because all these people writing these dystopian novels scare me. You read those dystopian novels, you think, well, maybe it's over. You know, but I'm an optimist, and yeah, I wouldn't be sitting here with y'all right now if I didn't believe we could do something about this.
I think I must operate in a little bit of optimism too, and I think about ancestors who I was like, well, I didn't have it that bad. I think about my grandparents too. Today's my grandfather's birthday. He was born in 1914.
Yes. He's still alive?
No.
Oh, okay,
no,
okay.
No.
That would be something.
That would be something.
That would be a marvel.
You know, served in a war, and yeah, I just think my aunts, like the elders, did things so I could live better, and so it's a duty to keep trucking, and my problems are not as bad as what they could be. And maybe that means I don't give myself more grace. Yeah, I should maybe give a little bit more grace, but I always think I didn't have to deal with any of that kind of stuff. And even though these times are scary, and you do think about your children and what they are up against, and I mean, we were born after, like, we don't know a world without Roe.
No, we don't.
And so what does that mean? What does that look like? And what is the ripple effect on autonomy for your body, no matter what your gender is? all of this has to be on alert. And I think some of those connections are being made. It's slow, but getting people to understand.
I'm kind of thinking of the line and Take My Hand of, our little family lived dignified and undignified times. And I think we're about to go through a lot of undignified times. And so thank you both for kind of those finishing statements. Thank you.